Hey, what's going on, guys? So we're going to be going over a few charts here that I have on my watch for the week. Obviously, we have the Trump, we have Trump or Besant meeting with um, China in London here tomorrow. They are 6 hours ahead, so we could get a pretty big move here in pre-market. Um, or potentially overnight. I haven't really been paying attention to the times or anything on when that would happen and when the finalized deal would follow through. But I'm pretty sure the finalized deal is tomorrow. It doesn't have to be, but I'm pretty sure they're planning on that, right? So just a few things that I want to talk about. I'm not a macroeconomic type genius, and I don't pretend to know things that I don't know. What I do know is that the initial decline started from whenever Trump was following through with implementing these tariffs, and absolutely plummeting his approval rating, right? And we had a lot of really, really, really bad uncertainty down here. And then once Trump kind of started to ease off of those plans and take back what he was saying, the market went on a really nice rebound, right, to calm everyone down again and get things back to normal. So now we have that decision coming back here, as well as Bank of Japan interest rate decision here this week as well. And not only that, but CPI. So we're just going to cover a few charts that I like for the long side, a few charts that I like for the short side. Obviously, the short side is going to be like SPY and NVIDIA, the charts that I've been talking about for a while now off of the DeepSeek gap. We'll cover NVIDIA first. So essentially what NVIDIA is, it obviously has very heavy ties to China. It's very dependent on what happens with China, and these charts can really start a nasty sell-off and a nice redistribution if the deal if we go back to the old ways of tariffing China 150% potentially, or just something on the high end. So NVIDIA is just one of those charts where we're at the deep seek gap. This is a very large gap down. If you guys remember the event that happened on January 27th, that was following the LPSY from this mid candle lower high, as you guys can see off of this progression gap here at 148.59, right? And then we sold off really aggressively. This was basically your distributive footprint that told us NVIDIA was in a distribution. And then from there on out, what happened was we got our really nice change of hands from the April low. What the April low did was it took out this previous level of support on the August 5th low, and then we got subsequently to that, we got higher lows on top of that August 5th spike that we had here towards the April 7th bottom. And then the higher lows kind of just built their way out, and this started to really become a leader that was, it was flat throughout the April 7th candle. The squeeze candle was kind of a laggard around here, right? And then it probably reacted to some sort of tariff news of some sort or some remark from Trump, right? And this became a really nice leader that sent us up all the way back up towards the deep seek gap, leading into this meeting with China in London tomorrow, right? So I don't think it's random at all that they ran this thing up into the top of the deep seek gap, how they gapped it up on the earnings report, and they actually sold this thing off pretty aggressively into that report, as you guys can see over here, right? So this was the whole basis around the trade. Off of like the earnings territory high, which is right around here at 143.84. That was one of my short side vehicles here, leading into the new into this new window of June, right? And what this did was it kind of stalled off towards the top of that earnings high. It took the earnings high, and it basically was a big fat failure to break through and displace right through the February OPEX high as well as the deep seek gap, right? So we have three critical levels, those two, as well as this also just being the July highs, and this was the preliminary sign, or June highs of 2024. These were the preliminary signs of distribution taking place that continuously took place into quarter 1 of this year, right? So are they going to continuously distribute this, and are we following the same seller that we are going to, obviously continuously follow here as we approach this deep seek gap? A lot of people look at news and events and all that sorts of stuff as, Oh, well, this was a random mishap, and we fell, NVIDIA fell 17% on 818 million volume, just over an overreaction, right? But oftentimes, guys, as we know, financial markets like to always throw something at you as an excuse to sell things off whenever they don't like the name anymore, right? And they didn't like the name at these levels up here from January through, January OPEX and through that December OPEX, right? This is all of a distributive OPEX cycle that can continuously start to happen as we approach those levels over here that we're at now. We already have our earnings report out of the way, like I talked about. And if you guys go into the intraday volume profile, you guys are able to see how there was a pretty large seller sitting off of this area on price on the earnings day, right? Thursday, May 29th at 9:30 on the open. What we had was a 30-minute rejection bar that was trading on some really nice big volume, right? You could see the amount of volume coming in towards the open, 75 million, and then the volume staying relatively hot throughout, most of the day following the next trading session. We had pretty decent volume and a really nice looking sell right off of the open, right? So you guys can see how they were trying to distribute this thing on the gap up. And then as we kind of push our way closer and closer towards that earnings territory where they were selling off into the open, you're able to see how they sold things off again into the Thursday session whenever we took the earnings high. And then we had a failure to break and base above that. And then we obviously sold. And then the market kind of gapped up, and we've been trading internally within that range now. So, with the weekly candle being set in place here, what we did was we swept the last week high. We still have the last week's low to be taken on that candle. And if you guys go into the daily chart, you're able to see how there is an unfilled gap towards 131.29, and you guys can see how that continuously kind of is the pattern here on this chart with these breakaway gaps that lead us all the way back down to 108.92, right? So this could be a fantastic um, watch list here. This could be a fantastic name for the watch list as far as the short side goes, just because the long side has absolutely no risk to reward. That could be, some sort of day trade if this were to coil up really tightly and then, blow its way all the way back up towards the all-time high if the meeting in London tomorrow is an absolute nothing burger and whatnot. But, the bottom line, guys, is that a lot of these are drifting higher on breakaway gaps, and they're pulling into areas on the chart that make sense to find the redistribution off of, leading into very critical events. And I feel like it's all predetermined and kind of aligning for some sort of sell-off. We go over into other areas of the mega cap stocks, and we can see how Apple has been trading absolutely bad, really, really bad. There's not been any sort of very large buyer commitment. The last time we had a very big gap up was May 12th off of a news candle, and then they just kept selling off each pop, right? And then we've just been trading really poorly on here on Apple as we move forward. I mean, this has been building out weeks and weeks and weeks of support with no true displacement to go fill the gap above, right? So I don't know if they are going to maybe pop it off of a China deal, and then subsequently to that, what we have right around the corner is the BOJ interest rate decision as well as CPI, right? So you could get everyone bowled up off of a whatever goes down with the China deal, and then that could lead to a redistribution off of the gap here from the tariffs, right? We haven't even breached all the way to the upper gap of the tariffs, right? Meanwhile, the overall market has completely sliced through every single one of those gaps, as well as the mega cap tech, right? There's every mega cap tech has recovered the April sell-off except for Apple, and I wonder why that is, because this name is heavily exposed. It has a lot of exposure to China, right? So if it has a lot of exposure to China, and we've been coiling up, and it's been very weak in comparison to the rest of the market, that kind of allows me to conclude something about maybe the China deal, right? Because charts sometimes will foreshadow as to what happens moving forward, right? Um, So we go over to Tesla. We could see how Tesla right now, this was a really nice 30-minute distribution that I think had a little bit of an overly aggressive sell, in my opinion. And with that being said, you could see how you kind of had your tight daily bull flag, as a lot of retail would like to call it. And then that tight daily bull flag led to expansion, which was essentially just expansion to redistribute. And then you had the whole Elon Trump beef that was taking place that really sold off Tesla. There's a few ways that we can kind of look at this right now. We could speculate and say that what they're doing is they are foreshadowing market distribution, just as what Tesla kind of foreshadowed within like around December. As you guys can see, throughout December, we had a really nasty failed breakout that then led to, after the breakout failure in January, led to really nasty distribution that was taking place in the beginning of February. You guys go over to the S&P and you could see the beginning of February was kind of a flat S&P, right? So the Tesla was foreshadowing something over here, right? Are they doing that again? Or is this a buyer stop raid for a risk on summer of George, where you have a back test of this resistance turning now potentially a support? You have an inside bar, and you have a wick on this daily candle that has most of the volume towards that low of day. You guys can see the 15-minute reversal bar that is being shown here on Tesla here with 19.7 million volume traded. This is the heaviest 15-minute candle in terms of volume that we have seen in literally months. I mean, we're going all the way back to January. We don't see anything with that sort of volume there on the 15 minute. So are those buyers going to be liquidated? Are those buyers going to continuously build out a sell climax? And are we going to be able to get a really nice trade off of Tesla this summer with this downside capitulation just being fuel for the fire to then rally this thing into the summer and, potentially catch a gamma squeeze on Tesla that revisits all the way back up towards the 415 spot? I don't know, but all I know is that most of the volume is at the lows. Could that buyer that bought that dip very aggressively fail, and could this turn into a really nasty lower high from right here? Yeah, it could, right? And that's kind of just why we're waiting to see what the market can do and what the market can show us, because right now we're at a very big breakout spot leading into very critical events, right? I think it's a buy climax. I've already been very open about that. If you guys go to the S&P 4-hour, if you guys go to the NASDAQ 4-hour, and if you guys take a look at the data that I've been showing you, it's all been just about, signature prints coming in lower. If those continuously build, we're selling off the highs and we're building out these tight, coiled higher lows, but they're not of any sort of strong character, I should say. The Mag 7 market is not in full agreement with one another. Obviously, we've had laggard names like Google that are still open to, revealing some opportunity for reversion all the way back up towards uh, their earnings gaps, right? And then you also have names like Meta that have just been absolutely on a monstrous run and very overextended from their gaps as to, where a structural chart would make sense from. Microsoft being another one of those where you're gapping up the next following day. You have some other gaps that are, sitting in between here. I don't know if that's a ghost wick or not, but you're getting a lot of these different things that are taking place, guys, that are just they're just really not making sense in terms of just a chart that looks fantastic, right? I mean, we have so many times in which Microsoft looks quite extended, and that's just kind of the character of the stock. So I'm not going to hold a crazy bias to the short side. I believe that there is one more opportunity, and that's why I swung some into from Friday into Monday. And that's kind of dependent on what happens throughout this deal tomorrow. I wouldn't be surprised if this happens during regular trading hours, because I think they need the liquidity to be able to unload the market if they want to, rip the band-aid off and unload the market. And I think that that would happen maybe potentially tomorrow with a really big spike in volatility. And then maybe that also just shakes out longs and we still get the summer of George effect where Vanna Charm takeover after we maybe meet this phantom print down here off of 579 where we sweep into this NWOG once again that has barely been swept into, right? There's so many different outcomes that can take place based off of the events that are coming. We could get a pop, and then that could be your capitulatory high in terms of shorts capitulating out of the market. Then you get a macro-based UTAD into another event like a hot CPI or a yen carry 2.0 happening. There's so many different outcomes, but basically in terms of just regular tech stocks, looking at those charts, you could see how Tesla is potentially foreshadowing the market or either a really nice long if we get the summer of George effect. We obviously have Nvidia at the deep seek gap being a place in which I found there to be big money finding fair valuation in an overvalued state there for the time being. And I think that they can continuously distribute that off of those levels, or maybe just head for like a UTAD up above the January 7th high. Very well could be January 7th being the high, being that is put in place for Nvidia. But if it doesn't happen, the short side trade will come back, and it will come back better than ever off of larger perspective UTADs that are happening on a weekly schematic, right? This could be a weekly schematic of distribution playing out into 2026 if this were to, find its run up throughout the summer, find a UTAD. 2026 is whenever Trump rips the band-aid off, and then we really start to sell in the bond market. Could probably bring some issues by that time as well. Maybe Taiwan invades China in 2026 as well. There's so many different catalysts that could take place later on as well, right? So I don't know Trump's plans. Nobody knows Trump's plans. As of right now, the trend is to the upside, right? And I'm fully aware of, fighting the trend being a dangerous situation. I think a lot of people exaggerate that, that judge me on Twitter. They really exaggerate, like, oh, you're biased to the short side whenever you're, fighting trend, and that's just not how you do it. That's not the case. First of all, you're speaking in hindsight about everything taking place right now, as this has just been a slow grind to the upside. Second of all, we have been successful with two shorts already that were of big size, right? We almost got cooked on this one, and then it opened at where our entry was off of the 592.58 dark pool print, which was the expiration high and also that gap fill. If you guys remember right, we were basing it off of like that gap fill there. And then we got the continuation from 593 down to 583. We caught a $10 fade there. We faded into February OPEX and we caught a $20 fade there, 595 into 575, right? So we caught about a $20 fade from our average to where the take profit was within the gap, as well as the 200-day moving average at that point, right? So this short side trade has been working. I hate whenever people talk about how, oh, you're a dumb bear that's just going to get cooked fighting the trend again. Meanwhile, it comes down to our entries. It does not come down to what the trend is, right? And whenever you have the climactic high and you have a trend reversal, that's whenever you can hold the trade for unimaginable targets that people don't think are going to, come that are going to be hit. And that's whenever you hit a very, very, very big trade that will make your whole quarter. And I'm not going to sit there and dwell on the fact that the market isn't going to sell off. We have our names to pivot towards. We have names like ARKK showing off immense strength here, even considering Tesla selling off very aggressively for a 2-day period of minus 3.5% and minus 14% on Thursday. And you can see how with a small Tesla rebound, ARK was going absolutely bonkers, plus 8.5%, and it held up relatively well on that Tesla sell-off. We only sold off 2.79% for ARK. And we had a very large buyer also entering into this one, just not as big as Tesla's on that day, right? So this was a fantastic opportunity over here within ARK. off of this little, flag slash consolidation type of look. And this looks like, potentially we have the summer of George, but charts could be ruined in an instant, right? And could there be a player that is, you know, looking at redistribution and they're selling within a buyer's tape? Yes, that's the same way that everyone thought we had the algorithmic, or however you say it, just a complete and total sell-off, algo-generated sell-off that was, taking place throughout this decline over here on this slow grind lower. And then next thing you know, we find a higher low, and it just rips its way to the upside, right? And same goes for over here, right? We had everyone thinking like, oh, high volume rejection point. This looks like crap, right? And that's a sell bar, and then the next following day we get a catalyst that completely squeezes us all the way back up to the second gap at 545, right? Or the first gap, I'm sorry. So with ARKK, I mean, this is displaying what could look to be from just a chart perspective. This is displaying, characteristics of a summer leader. However, we don't know what's the case yet. Where there's not enough information within the chart. Within Tesla, its biggest holding, it's just not there. The safer route and the safer chart that I can maybe get behind on here quickly would be something like Ford path of least resistance. I feel like this higher low here could be some sort of LPS within within the accumulation. If you guys take a look at the volume profile, we've had very elevated volume throughout March, continuously leading into April. This thing did not really sell off too bad. It sold off from about $10 down into 850, so kind of a bad sell-off, but very large accumulation that was taking place down here within Ford. And you could see through the volume profile how historically, I mean, this is really nice elevated volume. If you guys take a look at the volume shelf indicator, I'm sure you would see how Ford has very large volume at these levels, right? And what could this be? I don't know, but I think that this could be from the bigger perspective a higher low from this low, and I think we could have potentially found our final phases of absorption off of this resistance, which was a gap fill that we now successfully closed. We built up a lot of resistance over it. We got above that, right? And we had a really nice bullish looking earnings candle. There was not a lot of volume behind it. And then what happened was we kind of trickled our way back to the downside. Now we're kind of curling up against those EMAs, and we're looking like we might, undercut and rally and get back above 1040 on Ford, and potentially have a catalyst here for the upside, as well as your 921 on the weekly chart also kind of showing off characteristics of potentially a higher low, right? And we have a very large gap to go target up towards $12. And this resistance is fully absorbed, in my opinion. And the only way that this chart really gets ruined, in my honest opinion, would be like some sort of vol event that could be happening under the hood that nobody is really expecting. So I'm going to play it safe, and I'm going to long some names that look good and look constructive. And I really do hope we get to sell off again within the indexes, just so you feel a lot more comfortable buying into longs that have a reset chart, and buying into names that show clear characteristics and almost proof of strong behavior on a pullback that makes sense, that is structural, that is trustable, rather than just trying to chase longs on names, and being a stock picker in a market that has been quite difficult to be one in, as well as just the fact that you're chasing longs on a drift higher of weak looking price action in the indexes, right? That's why I haven't really been too open to the long. The last time I was open to the long was before May 16th, right? May 16th was that general window where we had a window of weakness, and the Vanna Charm returns June 9th. So Vanna Charm does return tomorrow. That does not mean that the market can't sell off. We could get something bad happening from an economic perspective, and from a geopolitical standpoint here, that can really sell the market off. And if it does sell the market off and it pops volatility, and you get positioning changes within the June OPEX and you start getting some, major change in positioning, and you get a lot of those calls away from their heavy gamma, then that's whenever you can get like a very, very big, substantial pivot where Vanna are not even, supportive for the market to rally higher anymore, right? If this were to fall off beneath, your 20-day, and if this were to, crack structure and essentially pull off something where it builds out all of these weak higher lows, so it kind of has a path of least resistance already built off of where we've consolidated from, which is like 586 and whatnot. Maybe we lose our 20-day and we also break the higher low structure, and then we hold these as now newly found progression from sellers, potentially on a UTAD look from this upper 600 test. And then, you back test your 20-day, and then you pull back and you fail the 200-day, and you're, heading for 565 now. And flows aren't changing anything about that. If we get into another bad, very, very, very highly volatile event here that maybe people don't understand is coming, right? There's a lot of things that could take place in terms of this, in terms of catalyzing the downside. And I think they're really running dry of inventory considering the character of the chart. We also have the ghost wick into 579. Banks, as far as banks go, they're really not too strong. They don't have the strongest looks by any means up towards the left shoulder peak from November into December. If these start to gain weakness gradually, I could see that kind of also foreshadowing something happening within the market that many don't see coming. I would say that there could potentially be a vol event that drives us back to 565. That's a long shot prediction just by the character of the charts and just by how everything has been trading and the behavior. I could see something like that happening, right? We don't have a lot of data to support that, but if, like I said, it gets really quiet and it gets really lopsided in terms of sentiment before we do find an unexpected crash that completely explodes vol and catches all the longs offside and just completely raids each and every single stop within the market and shakes everybody out, right? And that would lead to a big change of hands happening here and a complete and total pivot on my stance for summer potentially, right? This was all originally a window of weakness trade post May 16th. I hope you guys know that. And I've said that about 500 million times, right? So whenever people say, oh, you're a perma bear. No, I'm not a perma bear. I'm a bear throughout until, we get confirmation on what happens in a pullback, because pullbacks inevitably come. What is that pullback going to be? Is it going to be a very, very, very controlled sell-off, low vol move to the downside that, gets bought up in an instant and Vanna take over and we have a very quiet, easygoing summer? That could be the case, but we don't know yet. So that's all I'm really trying to say, guys. We'll see what goes on into pre-market and the intraday session tomorrow, but that's all I really have to say about the market as of right now. They have been also kind. Hello? Oh, my mic cut out. They've also been kind of selling off market leaders, and I don't necessarily know what's going to happen just yet with like Palantir. Could we be getting a UT into potentially a UTAD, and there could be a quick scare in the market, and then we kind of, grind our way to the upside, and then we finally get the redistribution and the pullback happening into Q3 and LPSY by Q3. That could also happen as well, right? So I'm being very patient with the short side opportunities that may present themselves this year. And I will be eyeing up kind of what happens this week and looking at, potentially a pullback or a gap up, a pullback and what happens to that pullback, a gap up and what happens on that gap up that gets everyone bulled to the max nearing the all-time high. We don't know, and that's why we have to wait for price and see what happens on the expansion out of this range right now. that we're attempting to expand out of on Friday, right? This is almost the day one attempt. Technically, over here was day one attempt, June 4th, which failed. And then we had June 5th being another failure, followed by a gap up on the PPI, and day one of expansion attempt here, right? So what's going to happen? I don't know, and we have to wait and see what goes on there. But with all that being said, guys, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. Basically, what's on my watch list would be like what happens with Apple, what happens with Nvidia up here towards these levels, what happens with Tesla off of the dip, what happens with ARKK, and how does it properly digest that move and set up something that looks good moving forward. Is it going to completely fail off of this, and is a lot of that volume also a very large seller that was somewhere hidden within here? I don't know, right? Most of the volume looks pretty bullish though, so I could definitely see a summer of George where our window is over for the short. And like I said, that's where I would pivot into some growth stocks. I would pivot into obviously Tesla. I would pivot into a few other names, potentially like Google in the Mag 7. And then obviously some other names like interest rate sensitive names. We have names like Solar, FSLR would be one of those charts that has a very, very interesting look here with this amount of volume coming off of the lows of this trend after it had a really clean base of 70 days almost here before we found the expansion, and that whole move coming off of that range was basically this just playing with this low at 129.22, kind of basing from that in about 10 points lower, and then finding these gap ups that are of absurd volume, right? Absurd volume. And you guys can see through the volume profile, we have quite the bullish volume profile on this name, right? And this could be kind of like your bottom for the time being, and this could be another solar summer. So is it a solar summer, or are we going to get a shutdown of all of this stuff going on? We don't know, and that's why we have to wait and see. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask, but I'm going to wrap it up there.